Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out with Mark Sleboda, and we got a whole bunch of stuff to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we're hanging out with the one and only Mark Sleboda. And before we get going, we want to ask, I was just wondering, all of this business about cracking down on cocaine transport and all that, let's see what Vladimir Zelensky thinks about that. Yeah, I kind of had a feeling he wouldn't be thrilled with that particular aspect of the Trump administration, although, let's face it, it's a fraud. They want to really crack down on oil transportation out of Venezuela. That's what they're looking at. All right, Mark Sleboda. By the way, before we get going real quick, we're going to talk about it a little bit later. But just so you'll know, before we get rolling, a little bit later, we're going to hip you to the coolest place on the internet. That's boosty.to/The Real Politique. That's where you can find out what's happening with Mark Sleboda, everything that he's doing, and keep up with all of his good works. All right, Mark. Welcome back to our humble show.
Garland, thanks for having me on. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Awesome. Looking forward to my trip to Moscow soon. Made possible, might I add, by the donations from all of these people here in the chat. They donated and said, "Hey, can you spare a dime for a fella that's down on his luck?" And they doggone it if they all didn't do it. So thank you very much, everybody who has donated. All right, let's start here, Mark. I think we should start, for all of the discussion of tomahawks and all these other things. The only thing that really matters is what's happening on the battlefield. That's where the rubber meets the road. What's happening on the back? I heard lots of S's and K's, that there's cauldrons of forming and all kind of things going on. And people asking for to take maybe a few months or a couple years to kind of get themselves together before they resume the war. Mark, what's happening on the battlefield?
Okay, so I mean, if we want to talk about game changers, we're going to talk about long-range game changers. Let's talk about Russia's new FAB glide bomb kits. They've upgraded them. They can now accurately they have a longer range. They've got like mini little jets attached to them, so they can turn an old. This is the equivalent of a U.S. JDAM, right? Except better. They can now take an old Cold War era airdropped bomb, of which they have infinitude amount in warehouses, right? Just like the U.S. does. And they can accurately direct it now at a target now 150 kilometers away, right? This is more than doubling the range of the glide bombs, which means that the aircraft stay well out of any remnant air defense that the Kiev regime might have. They've used it in the last week to hit cities, Nikolaev, Dnipropetrovsk. They're using it all over the front, and the Kiev regime's forces are already crying about it, right? Because it can come from such a distance, and it's accurate, and it's a big boom. As if the FAB glide bombs weren't already that enough of a problem, now they've got double the range, and that is an actual game changer. To a degree, right? I mean, not, Russia's going to win next week or anything like this, but it is a very significant, real technological improvement. Not a wonder weapon, but a gradual evolution of an existing weapon system that is going to have a real impact on the battlefield. So, I would say the other news in long-range strikes is that Russia continues its punishing long-range strike campaign of drones and missiles, and the blackouts of the Kiev regime's energy system, rolling blackouts across the country, continue. Now, the Kiev regime did get their licks in this week, or should I say, Keir Starmer did, because storm shadows were fired at a chemical facility in Bryansk region of Russia. So two things to say here, right? This isn't this. Let's drop this nonsense of storm shadow missiles provided to the Kiev regime. You know, we're already well past that. Everything's been admitted to and acknowledged. This is the UK firing cruise missiles into mainland Russia at a chemical factory. Now, the reason they're firing at a chemical factory and not a military target is because it's a soft target, right? Russia's proven that where it has air defense and electronic warfare, that it can bring storm shadows down easily 8 times out of 10, right? The GPS signal can be cut off. That's another thing. This targeting information has to come from the United States. So this is part of more what has been described in the New York Times and the Financial Times as a Trump administration policy of not only helping but directing the Kiev regime's long-range strikes against Russian energy facilities and industrial facilities in another attempt at escalation to try to force them to the negotiation table on American terms that would preserve the Kiev regime, right? Now, we don't know exactly how much damage was done. We know they hit Russia. Again, they can't protect everything. It's a big country. And this was, what would be considered a relatively soft target. There's reports of fires, but we don't know how extensive. It's probably unlikely that they managed to destroy the entire facility. These facilities are usually quite big, but the Kiev regime, or should I say the UK, does get their licks in, even if they're losing on the ground, all over the contact line. And even if Russia's nightly punishing long-range strike campaign is much more effective. I saw a video of another Patriot being toasted, by the way, provided by some hopefully not now imprisoned Kiev regime people or Kiev people in Kiev who uploaded some footage taken with their cameras to the internet, which is a crime under the Kiev regime. On the ground, Pokrovsk it's crumbling, right? Pokrovsk, the defenses are crumbling. It is a crisis situation for the Kiev regime. Russian forces are in mop-up. The associated, it's kind of a Pokrovsk, Mirnograd agglomeration in south-central Donbas, right? What was once a trade and logistics center. Mirnograd, the Kiev regime was kind of on the eastern side of Pokrovsk, and it was a big fortress, right? It was turned into a big fortress. It was meant to prevent attacks on Pokrovsk, while Russia's encircled Pokrovsk and attacked from another direction. But now they're also moving on Mirnograd and itself, and that fortress is being evacuated by the Kiev regime right now. So yeah, there you go. There's Mirnograd, and Pokrovsk is just to the left of it. I don't know why it's got smaller letters there. That makes no sense because Pokrovsk has a much higher population than Mirnograd, but it's one big. It used to be one big agglomerated defended area. Now it's basically mostly controlled by Russia, and what Kiev regime forces are in both sides are, for the most part, in cauldrons. They have not been able to get good supplies for several weeks now, going on a month or more, and everything is crumbling there, right? It's that is where we're in mop-up duty in Pokrovsk. Now the situation is the same, in the southern Kharkov region, right to the north, where Russian forces control in excess of 80% of the city. So that is another what one of these cities that is on the brink of falling, and Russia's been moving on them through the summer, and everything is going to come in the conclusion. Russian forces are also in the outskirts of Liman, in the northern Donbas, southern Kharkov area, and Russian forces have all but physically encircled Konstantinovka in the Donbas, which is the tail end of the Slavyansk, which you can see right there, Kramatorsk, and then down a little bit further to Konstantinovka. That's the defensive line there. There's Konstantinovka. You got it right there. So that's nearly physically encircled right now. The last I heard, there was like 800 meters left before full encirclement, which means it's already long been operationally encircled with drones and artillery, meaning that supplies and reinforcements can't be sent in, and people and medical evacs can't get out. So another crisis situation there. Russian forces also make big strides in the south, in Zaporozhye and Dnipropetrovsk region. In Zaporozhye, Russian forces are closing on Orehov, which is where the Kiev regime and NATO launched their ill-fated 2023 summer offensive out of, the one that Russia crushed. There are now a lot of reports, and I think some of them can be considered confirmed at this point, that further to the west there in Kherson, the Russia is making crossings of the Dnieper River in small units, but then gathering together to form critical masses in locations. They have taken parts of Kherson city, first on the left bank, now on the islands, and moving into Kherson city on the right bank itself. There's all kinds of things going on there. It's not like a big Normandy rush. It's more slow infiltration by small units all across that area of the Kherson region there. And it's happening so much it can't be denied. And it's all assisted at this point by the fact that the Kiev regime had to pull so many units out of the defense of Kherson to try to slow down the Russians in Pokrovsk, that the defenses there are extremely light, and Russia has, been training up its forces for contested crossings now for quite some time. Now, it's all, at this point, infantry, special forces, infantry, and drones, a lot of drone activity. But Russian drones are now operating pretty much in their entirety over Kherson city. So they're seem to be getting ready for, right now it's more infiltration stuff, but they seem to be getting ready for a possible big push. There's two possibilities. One, if the first may simply be that it's a diversionary attack. It's meant to prevent the transfer of more forces to the Pokrovsk region and maybe even force the Kiev regime to send some reinforcements there. But if they don't do that, then Russia may further exploit the situation, surge forces there, and make it into a big, real offensive, right? If they see a real opportunity to take Kherson city back and the Kiev regime is not doing anything or can't defend it right now. So I'm paying a lot of attention because it's quite interesting what Russia is doing right there, and maybe only simply because it is kind of a new and what was a sleepy area of the front because of the big Dnieper River. Right, it's now there's some activity there, and it's all, we were having these crinky offensives that the Kiev regime was making across the Dnieper River, directed by the British, for a year, and they were just throwing Marines away on the Russian side. Russian seems to be having much more success the other way around now, moving into Kherson city. So it's all quite interesting, these riverine operations that are going on there now, and it's the autumn, right? It's the mud season. It's not maybe the best season for it, but that doesn't seem to be stopping the Russians anyway.
Well, yeah, and it seems to me that the Kherson's a big deal because once the Russians, start crossing the Dnieper, start building up their forces, get an area in the Dnieper that they control, that they can cross at will, then now Mykolaiv, that's another major town on the water. It looks like a port town. That's the other thing. These are ports that the Ukraine needs to remain a viable state that they're starting losing. And what's this around the corner? Odessa. And that's got to really creep out the UK and the neo-Nazis, because the Russians are starting to get in an area where they can think about addressing
Now,
Odessa.
It has to be said, there's a long way from crossing the Dnieper at Kherson City to reaching Odessa. Note how many river crossings there are there, right? See how many rivers are. Everyone, of course, is interested in Odessa. Odessa is a Russian city founded by Catherine the Great, big port city, very strategic. NATO wants it, Russia wants it, but and I know there's a lot of Russians who would not consider the SMO a success if it ended without recovering Odessa as a Russian city. That being said, its geography makes it very complicated. And amphibious assaults are just not a realistic possibility without completely unacceptable casualties and without any real degree of success. But also, NATO wants Odessa so bad, right? The British were already building naval installations in and around Odessa before Russia's intervention in 2022. If I believe that if Russian forces are when Russian forces are actually in a position to move on Odessa, whether from more likely further from the north rather than all these contested river crossings, but whatever point that is, right, however long away it is, I'm very much afraid that the French and the British might then be so desperate and insert human tripwire forces in an attempt to claim Odessa for NATO. And that, that I think most of my fears that still exist of direct NATO Russia conflict, open direct that involve around Odessa. I think that is going to be a crisis moment, and the voices in Paris and London and Washington that something must be done to preserve Odessa within NATO proxy hands is going to reach a fever pitch. But we're a ways away from that. Right now we're just starting Kherson City games.
Well, the other part I think that is important here is this is why I've said for a long time, if I were the Russians, not saying that this is or isn't the intentional, I'd be in no rush. I would maintain course and speed. I would take my time, which is the way they fight anyway, because by the time they get to Odessa, who knows who's going to be in charge of France? Yeah. Who knows who's going to be in charge of Germany? The economic deterioration, and might I add, the military deterioration, because if, as I think and hope, China says there is going to be no negotiation for rare earths, you are shut down militarily. The longer it takes, the more you wear out and empty the cupboards in the West that they can't refill. So they can want to do everything.
Don't even worry about that. The French military and production rate is so low anyway, it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, so I can have a tripwire, but what happens if you yank the tripwire and the bomb doesn't blow? You know what I mean? So yes, we're going to put a tripwire force in there. We're going to put 5,000 French and 5,000 UK soldiers. Okay, well, what happens when they attack them? We don't have any more. Actually, all we really have is a tripwire. That's the problem with the whole tripwire thing. If all you have is a tripwire and it's not attached to a mine,
it's going to be attached to Trump. That's who the tripwire is attached to. That's the target, right? That's the whole thing, would be to get the Americans directly involved. Oh, you have to come save us from the Russian bear, right? I mean, that would be the entire purpose of such a thing, because they would have no hope of fighting Russia on, in intensive combat on the front lines in Ukraine. The British, the French, the Germans, right? The Polish are smart enough to not want any part of that. Give them credit for that, right? They're like, we're not prepared for that yet. But it will all be attached to Trump, right? To try to get, and I don't think he has any particular inclination for that, but the way his ear is bent one way and then the other way by the neocons, and both within and without his own administration, the neocons in both parties, it must be said, although he probably listens more to the neocons in his own party than the ones on the other side. But it's not like there's a real difference as far as foreign policy is concerned anyway.
Well, I'll say this to the French and the Brits: if you're waiting for Trump to come bail you out, if you're like, we're going to count on Trump, he's the guy that's going to come bail us out, man, you are putting yourself in a bad position. He will leave you hanging. I mean, politically, Trump leaves everybody hanging. That's his thing. So I'm just saying, that's a bad plan.
And Macron and Merz as the Three Stooges.
These guys are so stupid. At any rate, so I think that kind of sums up what's happening there. It seems to me, this whole tomahawk thing. Ray McGovern has said all along, there ain't no tomahawks, not happening, never going to happen. Forget it. This is all big talk, right? What's interesting is, in an interview, I covered it, I think it was yesterday, Trump said a couple of things. He said, well, we'd have to train people. It's not easy to fire those tomahawks, and we'd have to train other people. We know how to fire, and we ain't doing that. We're not training anybody to do our tomahawks. I mean, he pretty much came out and said, no tomahawks. And if you read between the lines, there never was going to be any tomahawks. But at any rate,
that's entirely possible. That at least 80% of it was bluff and bluster to try to force Putin, back to the negotiation table and accept a freezing of the conflict, a ceasefire. Right, that because Trump is back on that now, 2 steps back from Alaska at this point. But Putin,
well, how much of that, Mark? Mark, one quick question, because I always question that. Trump has a couple of audiences. He has an audience that's Putin. No, we'll force Putin to do that. But I believe, based on things he said, he knows the truth. I think also a lot of this stuff is aimed at the people around him that are always kind of squeeze him. You got to do this. Okay, sure. Yeah. Tomahawks. Yeah. Any day now, I'm going to give him tomahawks. Yes, sir. You give him tomahawks Friday. In fact, they're coming Friday, Thursday. Yeah, we ain't doing no tomahawks. And, I think a lot of what Trump does is the internal battle with the people around him that are always trying to shove him to do more. And he's always trying to worm out of it. I think there's a lot of that. Anyway, go ahead, Mark.
He's way in over his head, right? Trump doesn't have any firm foreign policy convictions, right? I mean, everything is about Trump, and I mean, not re-election for Trump now, although, I'm sure he entertains ideas about that too, or just being appointed God Emperor of mankind or whatever. But I mean, everything revolves around him and his perception of the public perception of him in the United States, right? Because he's an entertainer at heart. I mean, that's what he is. And he's in a very, I believe, emotionally insecure position because he's way out of his league in the enormity of the foreign policy and military, knowledge that's really necessary to make decisions here. By all accounts, first of all, Trump doesn't read. Right? I mean, he's never read in his life. I've heard again, he never read his own book, right? He likes presentations with lots of big pictures. And evidently, he doesn't regularly attend, he doesn't get a daily intelligence briefing. He's lucky if he gets one or two a week. So he gets most of his viewpoint from Fox News and social media. It's a most of you out there watching this right now, I'm quite sure, on a general basis, have a much better idea of what is actually happening in Ukraine than Donald Trump does. Right? He is fed constant disinformation by the Kiev regime that is filtered through his own people like Kellogg, presenting it as if, hey, Ukraine's still winning according to the fantasy world. And Trump, is okay with that to a certain extent because he likes living in a fantasy delusional world where he's actually wearing clothes. I mean, that's he operates there regularly. I mean, he's talking to Modi, and he's evidently, in his world, he convinced Modi to stop buying Russian oil. I mean, in our world, there's no relation between that and reality at all. In his world, the tomahawk is a wonder weapon. It's a miracle weapon, rather than relatively aged 1980s Top Gun era cruise missile that has a bunch of problems with how it would actually be launched. I mean, he just lives in a fantasy world at this point. And so occasionally he seems to have moments of clarity. I mean, even if he doesn't have dementia like Joe Biden's corpse, effectively, he's only engaging in our reality, briefly coming to the surface and then heading back down into Trump land, where there seem to be multiple people there at this point. So it's really hard. Of course, Dmitry Medvedev came out and said, all right, enough of this, right? We're just going to finish this on the battlefield. There's no point in talking to this guy anymore, which I think there is a growing grumbling sentiment exactly to that point in the Russian political elite, in society. They're sick of the clown and his hubris and his 180-degree turns, which end up being 360-degree turns, Annalena Baerbock style. I mean, since we last talked, he reversed his position and accepted a summit with, actually asked for a summit with Putin, and put the whole Tomahawk deal to the side. And then within 2 days later, apparently he canceled the Budapest summit with Putin because it was clear that Russia may sit down and talk, but they're still not agreed to a ceasefire, a freezing of the conflict on U.S. lines. And that's what Trump wants. He's got to preserve, a U.S. proxy regime in Kiev, even if he doesn't really like it, right? He has to. He's the U.S. president. So, in that fit of pique, he seems to have canceled it, at least for now. Maybe in the next week, he'll reverse himself 180 degrees again and again. Who knows? Who knows, where he's going to end up. It's kind of like that Twister game, you spin it around and then you have to put your body in this position and everything. And I just taking a look at Trump, right? I have to say, I mean, I'm no Twister flexible master myself, but I have to bet that Trump might be even worse at it than me. Just saying. So it's, again, to a certain extent, it all just, everything, all of this European noise, right? This war hawk noise coming out of Europe and the Kiev regime, all of the 180-degree turns, diplomacy, escalate to de-escalate, bluff, bluster, threats, carrots, do business together, all of this, it's all just noise. It's all just noise. All of Trump's social media posts trying to chart his bipolar highs and lows, forget about it. It's pointless. Follow what is happening on the battlefield. The U.S. Just announced new sanctions against Russia, against two Russian oil companies, Lukoil and Rosneft, I believe. I mean, I'm just like, is there anything left of them that you haven't sanctioned already? I mean, seriously, at this point, who cares? Russia has so little exposure to American economically at this point that the U.S. sanctions just don't matter. They're not even noticed here. But we also see now these long-range strikes green-lighted again into Russia, first with the HIMARS over the last few weeks, and now with the Storm Shadows, even if Trump doesn't send the Tomahawks, simply because they're not in a good system for transfer. He may be pushing the Germans to send the Taurus, the British and the French to keep sending whatever Storm Shadows and Scalps they manage to scrape together, as it's all on production at this point, so low amounts, but they'll keep at it. I expect to see more Storm Shadow strikes, trying to find soft targets, and that is what U.S. NATO reconnaissance planes constantly doing circles in the Black Sea, and U.S. satellites are doing. They're trying to map out holes for missiles and for drone strikes in Russian air defense, because Russia's constantly moving their air defense around as well, right? And it's impossible to do that without the U.S. And the U.S. is actively doing that. They may not be willing to send the Tomahawks, but for the systems that have already been sent, they're doing their best to direct these into Russia. Again, the goal is to try to do them enough economic damage at this point that they, come to the negotiating table. The problem is that Russia is doing many, many times more economic damage to the Kiev regime every night. And I don't know. The last I saw, the U.S. just passed $38 trillion in national debt, and the European economies are literally a basket case. France, the UK, Germany are in an even worse condition because they can't print money. Money printer go blur, quantitative easing like the U.S. can with the dollar. So, I mean, I know there's constantly news. Every other week you open up and, Russia's near economic collapse, right? It's going to force them to end the conflict. No. Europe is in near economic collapse. The U.S. isn't near economic collapse, but they're economically in a bad situation. They're living way above their means in national debt, and they just started a trade war with China that China is much more prepared for. And right now, on the rare earths and lithium batteries and a whole host of other things, the U.S. is still dramatically dependent on China for their high-tech industry, for their AI, for their military high-end industry, i.e. those Patriots and Tomahawks and things that they're so short of. Xi Jinping effectively has Trump over a barrel, right, and is doing the dirty. I mean, that's the situation right now. And the Trump, how dare China do what we've been doing with export controls and restrictions against China for a couple of years now. It's the rest of the world that understands what is going on. I mean, the Schadenfreude, they must be, everyone is enjoying seeing the U.S. bully and Trump with his tariff threats, his mafia-style tactics, his humiliations, forcing everyone to come and kowtow before him. All of these smaller nations, all of these nations in the developing world, they're all sitting back and they're just gloating at the position that Trump has literally walked the U.S. into, starting another trade war with China that they cannot win, just like, he and previous administrations have started a military conflict in Russia's backyard, a land-based conflict in Ukraine that they cannot win. And it's not just about the U.S., right? Because there is a figurehead on top, Trump, who doesn't like to lose. He hates to lose, right? He, even when he loses, he tries to spin it as a victory. Well, it's going to be really hard for him to spin Ukraine, and it's going to be really hard for him to spin losing a trade war to China at this point. And Dmitry Medvedev said it flat out. Whatever he may say, no matter how many times he may say it, it doesn't make it true. This is Trump's war now. That's it.
Well, and I'll say this. This was kind of inevitable because if you look at it, it's one thing when you're going after Libya and Iraq and things like that.
Yeah.
Or
Venezuela.
Exactly. When you decide you're going to tackle super world powers, Russia and China, inevitably a world power is going to have something that it can use against you. It's going to have something that you don't have. And in this instance, it's obvious for Russia because they were in Russia's neighborhood, and you're dealing against a military that powerful in its own neighborhood on its border. Well, you just asked for a loss, for an L. You're getting one. And with China, with their industrial and economic and technological might, they're going to have a whole bunch of things they can use on you. And I say this, Mark, I want to get your thoughts on it. So now I think the conventional thinking is, okay, China's played this card, right? And then at the U.S. at some point, we're going to sit down and talk with them. And at some point, we'll make a deal and they'll start selling us rare earths again, right? And that's kind of the conventional thinking. China made a statement that I interpreted as this: the United States is rampaging around the damn world, raising hell. And about time somebody stopped them, and we're going to do it. That's my interpretation of what they said. And I don't think it's outlandish, when they talk about world peace, that they're doing this for world peace, to say, hey, who's the one that's kind of causing all of the world peace problems? My point being, China can put a halt to this crap to some extent. If I'm China, I just tell the U.S., you know what? You guys, what do you think? I'm going to make a deal and sell you this stuff so you can shoot it back at me? Here's a list of things that you have to do. And if you do them all, the answer is still no. But it would be nice if you did them anyway. There is no universe in which I will ever sell you this stuff again. Not going to happen. Do what you got to do. If I'm China, I have to consider that at least.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's tough to say.
Once and for all. Go ahead.
It's tough to say, of course, how the Chinese leadership sees this. If they did cut a deal with the U.S., right, and resume. First of all, rare earths it's not a ban, right? It's not a ban. It is, they're requiring everyone to basically go through a license and registration process. And it's not going to be allowed to be used to military or dual use purposes. Just like the U.S. has regularly done with high-end semiconductors and semiconductor lithography and other manufacturing equipment to China for the last few years. China's just reversing it, right? Nearly identical language, right? And they're saying, it's a national security interest for us. The U.S. is rampaging all around the world, and they do keep shoveling weapons made with our precursors, our rare earths into separatists in Taiwan. So right now it is, you have to apply and military won't be approved. Of course, the Pentagon is scrambling to try to stockpile on rare earths, but ultimately no one in the world makes rare earths, refines rare earths to the quantity and to the quality of refinement that is needed for these high-end chips. You try to stop the highest-end chips getting to China. Well, China just stops the chemicals that everyone needs to make the chips from going to the U.S. It's kind of the ultimate quid pro quo. And it has to be said that China has been preparing for this, right? They identified one point of their resources that they got from the U.S., helium. It's industrial use, not just for funny voices and balloons. They 2 years ago, they got 95% of their helium, industrial helium, from the United States. In 2 years, that number has been dropped to 5%. They went absolutely out of their way to make sure that China no longer had any the U.S. didn't have any leverage on China. And that's just one example, right, of what they have done. In exports, right, China is an export economy, and the U.S. was supposed to be this, the ultimate consumer that no one could do without. Everyone wants access to the U.S. market. Well, in the last year, China has done wonders, right? I mean, the numbers are just shocking, to redirect its exports to Southeast Asia, to Africa, even to Europe, and for domestic consumption. It's been very successful. Their exports to the U.S. are now down to 10% of their exports, something that they can live without, right? And the U.S. just no longer even has that consumer leverage now that the Chinese need the U.S. market. The U.S. needs China economically more than China needs the U.S. at this point. And they've worked hard to get to this point. And if they were to cut a deal, the U.S. would have to make major, humiliating, exceptions, concessions to the Chinese. And you may be right. They may be making the geopolitical military calculus that we just never resume this, right? It will take you at least a decade to build the rare earth refinement, whether in the U.S. or then now they're looking at Australia or anywhere else, wherever. It'll take you a decade to get where you were getting, at least to where what you were buying from us. So that will be a 10-year sprint for us to put us permanently beyond your military reach. By then we'll be so far ahead that you can't. Right now, you really don't have a chance of winning off our own coast on the Taiwan Straits and the South China Sea already. In 10 years, there won't even be a question, right? It'll be a blue water conflict in the middle of the Pacific that China will win within 10 years, if you want to go down that road of military confrontation. So that's a possibility. We don't know exactly what the Chinese leadership is considering, but everything says that they're pretty. All the signs, they're pretty much in a no compromise kind of wartime mode with the United States. They're fed up. They're the only country that isn't playing this game of trying to play to Trump's narcissism and his ego, blowing smoke up his posterior. Even Russia is doing that, right? I mean, not Medvedev. He's allowed to be the bad cop. But Putin,
Right.
Putin is unfailingly polite with every world leader, whatever the relationships is. That's just Putin. But he still continually goes out of his way to try to play the game of courting and manipulating Trump. Chinese have never played that game. They're not in a position where they feel they have to do that, and they've been preparing for this economic. They said, "Oh, you want to decouple from us? Ha! Well, we're going to decouple from you now because we've prepared for it." Are you ready for it? The Chinese, they are, and it's shocking. A lot of Western people, who have been every 6 months predicting China's economic collapse, just like they've been predicting Russia's collapse for the last 20 years. They live in their own fantasy world, and it's caught up to them because occasionally they do have to surface and recognize reality. And economically with China, and first they economically failed to crush Russia's economy. I mean, by any stretch of the imagination. They failed to economically or to politically isolate Russia or economically. They failed to militarily defeat Russia with a proxy war in Ukraine. And now they're failing an economic war against China. And hegemony is slipping from their grasp, just.
Well,
it's remarkable how fast it's all happening right
Well, I would say this: if China has you over a barrel like that, hegemony's been gone for a long time. You didn't know it because the intellectual
now.
hegemony is. I mean, it's worse than. I mean, it's these people are living in a fantasy world, which works until you meet the real kinetic world. And what all China's saying is, you can live with those narratives. Oh, you're great, you're powerful, you got all that, but we ain't selling you
Still need
nothing.
rare earths.
Yeah, and you
You
can't
want
get
to make
them.
semiconductors, you need rare earths.
Yeah, and if I'm China, I gotta say, to me, okay, let's say for the sake of argument, the U.S. says we're not buying anything from you, so you'll lose 10%. If I'm China, I say, well, if you attack me, it'll be a lot more expensive. The cheapest thing I can do, if you attack me, it could be nuclear, all kinds of things could happen. The least expensive thing for me to do, especially since you said we're going to war with you. The cheapest thing I could do is stop selling you things that you could use to go to war with me to make it virtually impossible for you to go with war with me. Or you're also saying you're going to take out my friends. You're going to go after Iran or Venezuela or Russia, all of these others. I'll make it impossible for you to go war with any of them. And if you choose to, you will soon be out of weapons and you will be defenseless. And then you'll really come crying to me. And the answer will still be no.
Yeah, you're right, exactly, because the Chinese leverage over the U.S. economically has now reached the point where not only can they blunt and counterattack any economic war that the U.S., but it now gives them geopolitical leverage to use against the United States in situations like Venezuela, right? You want to take out a country that's friendly to us in the Western Hemisphere? You think this is the era, the century of the Monroe Doctrine? If you do, they could say, right? I mean, I'm not saying they are, but they are now in a position where they could say, you'll never see another gallium or another ounce of gallium or anything else if you overthrow the Venezuelan government.
Exactly.
It's possible.
Yeah. But my perspective would be, and if you do, and if you don't, my perspective would be, if you're like, I'm going to shoot Garland and I got let's say you got 12 bullets, but after that, you need to buy the rest of them from me. I ain't selling you no bullets. When you run out of bullets, you ain't shooting at me no more. I'm not selling you anymore. I don't care if you've already told me you're going to shoot me. To me, I think China is in a position. I don't see any alternative for them, especially when you're dealing with a mad dog. It's not like you can make a deal with a mad dog. They're mad dogs. Their nature is to bite anything near them, friend, foe, anything. So since you have an actor that is neither competent nor trustworthy, you have to use any means necessary. But speaking of that, Mark, let's get to the important stuff right now, because I know our viewers want to know, how in the heck can I keep up with all the good works of Mark Sleboda? Mark, let's talk about boosty.to/the real politique. Oh my gosh, we're at 217 subscribers, rapidly approaching 225. What's happening, Mark?
Okay, yeah, because I'm a Russian citizen living in Russia, I can't make use of monetization of YouTube, Substack, Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee. I can't use any of that stuff. So Boosty, though, is sanction proof. It is essentially a sanctions proof Patreon, and that's where I've set up shop. It's worked quite good for me, right? I put all of my material, including the stuff I do there with Garland, available for everyone. But I also do a lot of exclusive content for those who have the ability and the inclination to support my cynicism more directly. I put out a in focus video on one particular topic, a direct question and answer session where you get to ask me questions every week, and a week in review every week. 3 pieces of exclusive content. It's usually far more than 3 hours worth of exclusive content. And we also have a private Discord community that you get access to, where you can debate and discuss what you agree with me or you don't, whatever, with each other, with no trolls, no NAFO bots, no spam, no adverts, anything like that. I really like it, and I think it's got a lot of potential, and I hope some people might consider joining us there.
All right, there you go. Go there, become a subscriber. You can become a member and get access to exclusive content. So follow Mark Sleboda, keep up with everything that he's doing, and make sure you support him. It's very important that you support the various people here on alternative media because, we're not getting paid. Most of us are got money coming out of our own pocket to keep this little thing going. So, and it's critical. This stuff is critical. You guys, look at that. I mean, we got over 1,000 people watching today. So support Mark Sleboda. Oh, where are you? Are you on X, Mark?
I am on Twitter X and Substack, and I mean I can't make use of it, but I'm there as well. And Facebook, I think I still have an account there for all the other grandparents out there, and so forth.
All right, thanks a lot. All right, everybody, thanks a lot. Don't forget everything's Patreon, buy me a coffee, all that stuff's available if you want to donate to this channel. And of course, when everything scrolls apart, I do have a PO box. So if you want to send whatever, snail mail, people send books and so you name it, all kinds of stuff, donations, whatever, then my snail mail option is there also. Thanks a lot, Mark. Everybody, don't forget the most important thing that you can do. Share this on all your social media platforms. Mark, you got one more.
Yeah, Garland's coming to Moscow, so we're going to be hanging out, and my wife and I are going to take him out to a fabulous dinner and have a good time. And so that's all taken care of. But he's going to want to buy one round of vodka. So because, that's tradition. So he's going to buy this man a coffee so he can buy a round of vodka. Just saying.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Don't forget to share this. We're out.